To learn about something, you need to be stimulated about the topic, no matter what it is, whether it be cooking or maths or electronics. And by being in a hobby shop, your brain will change to that learning, absorbing, what can I do with this, what can I do with that, what do I need to make this happen, and that is part of the learning process.
So the hobby market exists, but it's fractured and very small at the moment. It doesn't have the growth opportunities that we probably had years ago.
There was so many more electronic shops in the old days than what there was now. I mean, I remember when I first came to Melbourne, it was like, wow, this is incredible. But then you learned that the different ones had different skills. You know, Dick Smith was more available locally, but then there was other ones. There was like, I think, a guy called Rod Irving Electronics that was in the city.
Dick Smith's got out of that sort of business because he got out of the business a long time ago and sold to Woolworths. So you can say the Woolworths have got out of the bits and pieces market and have left it to Jaycar and Ultronics to service it. But you can still buy these things and go into a Jaycar or Ultronics store, and there's plenty of people in there buying stuff.
There seemed to be a lot of stores back then. There were 4 or 5 major players, whereas now pretty much Jaycar and Ultronics are still the only 2 major players. There's Oatley Electronics with their surplus gear.
The hobby electronics scene has fractured somewhat.
Every single electronic store that I remember has now literally had to pursue some other path to allow them to have a strong revenue stream. They literally cannot survive in electronics. They just don't have the space.
I don't really think the demise of the electronics stores has really hurt the hobbyist electronics movement, because with the e-commerce revolution, you can buy everything on the internet. There's no need to go to the store anymore.
It's almost been wiped out.
As a retailer, you do need to make money selling components, and therefore if you're going to keep your hobbyists happy by having a full range of components, you need to offset the expense of selling components people need into the margin of selling larger products that people may want as well.
Everybody eventually got into some other thing that they could make some real money out of, and the electronic component supply of it disappeared.
Amateur radio is a good example. Most of the ham radio experts, ham radio enthusiasts, would build everything. I just recently went to the 100th anniversary of the Wireless Institute of Australia. Absolutely fantastic. Now, not that much is built.
Everybody had sort of the electronic component business, but I think by about the late 80s they started to realise it was disintegrating on them. It wasn't making any money, so they all got into some field. It was like computer parts, it was amateur radio, it was, some other field, but something that they could do. And, obviously Dick Smith and Jaycar have got into a lot of sort of, little goodies and little trinket things, little DVD players and little TVs and all sorts of stuff like that.
People moved away from electronics for electronics to applying technology.
They're totally changed. It's all consumer driven. They might have the token multimeter, the few token connectors and parts and things like that. Back then, people working there would actually know, they would know about the components. They were hobbyists themselves. You had to be a hobbyist to actually work there. Now, of course, they don't know anything about it. So you just go in, get the parts, and you go to the counter and they don't know what to do with it. They go, what's this? And you have to actually do all the legwork for them to get write down the individual part numbers. It's crazy, but that's the way the world's going.
But it's like everything. I mean, how much money are you going to get selling resistors and soldering irons? I mean, it's not much. You can see why they've had to move in the direction they have. It's just a little disappointing, I think, in some ways, that a lot of the classic old electronics shops have closed. It does make it a bit harder.
So these days now, the stores are becoming... there's less of them. You pretty much have to go out to Clayton for Rockby and so on. You'd have to travel a lot now to get your parts.
Rockby Electronics sells electronic components as well as finished electronic products. We sell right across the board, from hobbyists right through to manufacturers.
Kids today, if they're interested and want to go and get components, they can go off to Jaycar. It's a wonderful place.
I'm a bit of a one-trick pony. I learned an awful lot at Dick Smith Electronics, and it worked very, very well. Made Dick Smith a lot of money.
But Gary went on, when he saw Dick Smith Electronics moving into consumer, he sort of took over the component side. And I know Gary, and he still uses the same formula that I originally used at Dick Smith Electronics. I buy most of my components there because he's taken over with that market.
And it is components, and they can obviously make money selling components.
When Dick sold out, the company was starting to steer away from its hobbyist roots. And I decided that in order for Jaycar to survive as a business is to stay under the radar from the very large Woolworths-owned Dick Smith Electronics, because the executives there could easily have crushed me if I tried to take them head on. So I decided to do things that they didn't particularly care much about anymore, and that was to keep servicing the hobby enthusiast market. We did slightly different kits. We did kits that were more complex than Dick Smith Electronics, and they couldn't crush us by saying, we'll sell whatever Jaycar sell, we'll sell for half the price or something. because they didn't have the product.
In terms of componentry, if you go into a Jaycar store these days, there's a much wider range than there was 10 years ago.
When I was at Dickies, there were about 2,000 SKUs, stock keeping units, products. We have about 9,000.
I mean, he's very fortunate because he doesn't have much competition these days because the market has basically moved smaller. But if you look at his electronics catalogue, it's as good or probably better than we ever had in our day.
Whilst we still are very much a business like Dick Smith Electronics, we're still a very different business to what Dick Smith Electronics was.
Jaycar are actually quite remarkable. They're still hanging in there. I find it quite remarkable how they can still have that focus on electronics components.
So it's good to see that components are still available. So if you want to be an enthusiastic, you can still build things. I think that's most important.
You can still buy a lot of kits and things, but it's just becoming harder and harder to get standard parts that would have been commonly available 10 years ago.
You know, resistors. We carry quarter watt, eighth watt, 1 watt, 10 watt resistors in about 300 different electrical resistance values. If you're an executive and you only understood number crunching, you'd say, why do we have to keep 1 meg resistors? We hardly ever sell them. Why don't we just sell the 47k and the 10k and the 4.7k? But you can't do that. You've got to carry the whole range. It's like a hardware store not carrying all the nuts and bolts, you know, between 1/8 of an inch and half an inch. You know, it's ridiculous.
They've got a bigger range than they ever have. People have said that Jaycar are going downhill because they've got the fart-in novelty gadgets and things like that, but they've explained that they have to have those to pay the bills, so that's sort of understandable.
The world of choice is something that's never going to be simplified. You can have everything in right or left-handed, pink, blue, puce, cream, beige, off-white, etc. And choice is something that is endless. It's a bottomless pit.
Yeah, it would be certainly impossible to keep every part ever made. It's almost an infinite task.
There's a big problem with stocking a wide range because there is so much stuff.
We try to keep some sort of a lid on it in order to keep our warehouse from exploding at the seams. But yes, the world is a more complicated place. There was no such thing as a GPS receiver, or a computer for that matter, in 1975.
But we try and keep a general level of common parts, as well as new type parts that are coming through.
I think one of the issues that is facing a lot of electronics parts retailers at the moment is very similar to what's happening with bookshops. If you look at what happened with Amazon, Amazon's objective was to warehouse everything and have everything ready for shipping. So they built enormous centralised facilities, service everybody online, so you place an order and they ship it from their warehouse. For a small local bookshop, it's just not practical to maintain a copy of every single book ever printed.
We've got competitors who keep 160,000 components online. They're usually US distributors. And they can only get away with it because they operate out of a warehouse in the middle of Texas.
We're seeing the same thing happen with electronics. Companies that have really shifted to an online model can keep very large inventory in a central location. They don't have to worry about retail outlets. And so I think that's made it very hard for retailers in a small market like Australia, where you have to maintain a retail presence, have people walk into your shop, and you're really limited geographically.
That can work internationally because you might sell 300 or 400 of those different microcontrollers all over the world.
Companies like SparkFun that can sell to anywhere in the world, you can place an order on Tuesday and have it in Australia or Thursday or Friday, are really making it hard for those small local electronics parts retailers.
At fairly high markups too, they're not cheap.
These days, I think it's more challenging because quite often you basically have to shop off the web. The parts overseas, they'll take some number of days to arrive.
The tyranny of distance as Australians does make it difficult to learn electronics and progress with a hobby. It's a double-edged sword. We're very lucky in that we have the internet, so we can get information from anywhere in the world and learn about projects and things we would like to reproduce and make. However, a lot of the parts used are sourced or manufactured from overseas. So you might have that information to build that project come down the line in 30 seconds and you've got your guides and you're ready to go, but you might have to wait 1, 2, 3 weeks depending on your budget to actually get those parts.
You can source things on the internet and you can call up overseas electronic suppliers and just bring in the parts that you need.
Now, that's not as good as going down to your local electronics store in Australia, but if you live in rural areas, it can be just as good.
Now you have almost an infinite variety of components available which you've never had back in the old days. I wouldn't trade the modern age for anything.
So if the question is where do you physically go, there's only a small number of places, but the online shopping is extraordinary.
Whether it comes from China or America or whatever, there is a huge range available if you know what to look for. There are companies such as Mouser, for example, which is represented in Australia, and they've got a huge catalogue. And there are other companies that have got similarly large catalogues, and you can order virtually anything if you know what to look for and how to order it.
It's extraordinary that something can come from halfway around the world in 3 days and be at your door, but it's also you need to have had the experience to pick the right part.
Shopping over the internet is as difficult as shopping with mail order if you're not entirely sure about something. And there'll always be that element of risk. Have I ordered the right part?
Yes, you've got to crawl first before you can walk. You need to know what to buy or what you really need before you order it in online, because invariably you'll get the wrong thing. So that's why you start off with the shop. Like Jaycar, you can go into it, you can handle it, you can look at it, you can see it, you can make sure you can buy the right thing.
Shopping over the internet has made finding out the information you need to buy the right part very difficult, because everyone has their own opinion of how something should be put together.
If you're looking for electronic information, unless you go to a magazine such as ours, and we're obviously available on the internet, or you go to a semiconductor manufacturer who provides a lot of data, then a lot of the information you get on the internet will be suspect, very definitely.
Even though I'm an online electronics retailer myself, and also as a hobbyist, sometimes I will just drop in the car and drive down the road and visit my 2 electronics stores to physically find out whether something's going to solve my problem.
We seem to be in a little bit of a time warp in that we sit here, you have an idea, you want to put something together, and you think, okay, I need some parts for that. I'll place an order, and then a week goes by, your parts might arrive. You just can't go down to the local shops and buy the things that you can in a lot of other countries around the world.
As we've progressed in the human race, our attention span has decreased. So if you're a child and you're thinking, I'm going to build this project, but I have to wait 3 weeks for the parts to come from China or the US, it is a bit more difficult to stay enthusiastic, yes.
I need a servo motor, and bang, there it is, and you're going within a few minutes, because one of the, I think it's the killers to passion is endless delays.
And if you have to order them online and they take a while to arrive, it's a real barrier.
One of the reasons I started Tronics Labs was I was very disappointed with other online retailers and some bricks and mortar retailers in that we couldn't buy parts that were becoming more and more popular, such as Arduino compatibles and sensors and other more specific parts that weren't available at bricks and mortar. And now one of our goals is to have local stock of suppliers from all around the world to make Australians be able to get their parts in a much quicker period of time.
If you look around a lot of major Asian cities, they have places you can walk into, a shopping mall that's just full of electronic parts. And there is no such thing in Australia.
I lived for a couple of years in Singapore, so there was a place in Singapore called Sim Lim Tower, which was just unbelievable. The first time I went in there, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to lose barrel control. It was insane, I mean, they had just everything. I mean, they had factories there that made video recorders. They just had all the stuff that was in video recorders just in bags. I mean, you could buy LEDs in bags. You could buy these big displays. I mean, it was insane. I just walk around the place for hours on a weekend just wanting to buy stuff.
Likewise, in the US, there are a lot of retailers. They've even got places like Fry's Electronics, which is like heaven to a technology geek.
As an electronics hobbyist, that would surely be awesome, because it'd be great to park your car or have one train trip and get it all in one spot.
You tended to find all these little places that just become hot for a couple of months and then they get, they disappear or whatever. So it's very much, you do go hunting, looking for things, that's for sure.